This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. It may sound like the name of a mid-2000s nu metal band, but axis theory is actually one of the most interesting and potentially important ideas about harmony to come out in the last 50 years. It was developed by Hungarian theorist Erno Lendvai to explain the revolutionary works of one of the biggest classical composers of the 20th century, Bela Bartok. Bartok's music was a rich blend of traditional ideas and new innovations, and his approach to harmony gives us some really cool insights into what chords are capable of. You see, Bartok rose to prominence in the early 1900s, around the same time composers like Arnold were famously rejecting the concept of tonality, or building your music around a key center, instead inventing new kinds of musical structures that treated all 12 notes as equal. Composing with all 12 notes is called chromaticism, and Bartok wanted in on that action, but he was also fascinated with folk music and earlier traditions, so he wasn't prepared to abandon tonality completely. Instead, he combined it with other ideas in order to develop his own systems, which have applications far beyond his own work. So what is axis theory? Well, it's pretty much a direct evolution of an old friend, functional harmony. We've talked about this many times before, but to briefly review, functional harmony is the idea that different chords in a key have different functions or jobs to do. These break up into three main categories. You have tonic function chords, like the 1 chord, which provide a sense of rest, subdominant chords, like the 4 chord, which add instability and motion, and then dominant chords, like the 5 chord, which are directional enough to point you back home. Traditional functional progressions work by starting on tonic, moving to subdominant, then dominant, then back to tonic to start all over again. The 1-4-5-1 progression has been a staple of Western music for centuries, and it's still in common use today. But Bartok wasn't a fan. Instead, he preferred progressions like this one, which Lendvai argues is still basically the same thing, even if it doesn't really sound like it. How? Well, let's take a step back and look at which chords actually do which jobs. If we're in the key of A, then obviously A major has tonic function. If we go up a perfect fifth from there, we get to E, the 5 chord, which has dominant function, and if we go down a perfect fifth instead, we get D, the 4 chord, which is subdominant. But what if we keep going? Well, going down another perfect fifth from D gets us to G, which isn't in our keys, so we'll ignore it for now, although don't worry, we'll come back to it. Going the other way though, a perfect fifth above E is B, which is in the key. Specifically, it's the 2 chord, B minor, which is generally considered subdominant. After that is F sharp minor, the 6 chord, which is tonic, and then C sharp minor, the 3 chord, which is... okay, confession time. If you've watched my previous videos, you've probably heard me say that 3 minor is a tonic function chord, and I stand by that, but this is actually something that music theorists have been arguing about for a really long time because we are very fun at parties. Anyway, Lendvai subscribes to an older view that says the 3 chord is actually dominant, and this isn't ridiculous. It's very similar to the 5 chord, and it contains the 7th note of the scale, which is so important to dominant function's sense of directionality that we've nicknamed it the leading tone. I have some arguments for why it could still be considered tonic, but Lendvai's system falls apart unless it's dominant, so I'll concede the point. For now. If we look at what we've got so far, there's a clear pattern forming. Going up a fifth at a time, we've got subdominant, tonic, dominant, subdominant, tonic, dominant. It's just repeating itself. What if we were to expand that to chords that aren't in the key of A? Well, in that case, G sharp chords would probably be subdominant, then D sharp chords are tonic, A sharp chords are dominant, and so on, giving us a function we can assign to every single chord, whether it's actually in our key or not. And this makes sense, at least sort of. Let's go back to our original 6 chords from the key of A. If we ignore these 3 and just focus on the minor chords, we see that, again, B chords are subdominant, F sharp chords are tonic, and C sharp chords are dominant. But there's another key that's all true in, F sharp. Here the chords become major, but they keep their same functions. It's just instead of working with these major chords from A, they're attached to these minor chords. Then we can take those chords, plop them back into A, and retain their functions from F sharp due to the functional overlap between the 2 keys. It requires a bit of harmonic sleight of hand, but if we repeat this process of borrowing functions enough times, it results in a pretty elegant system. Okay, so in any given key, we can assign functions to all 12 potential chord roots, with each function covering 4 notes. These are the axes from which the theory gets its name, and Lendvai argues that any chord can replace any other chord on the same axis without meaningfully changing the harmonic structure. This may sound absurd, but it actually makes a lot of sense, and we can see that if we look at the dominant chords. Dominant chords point us back to the root, so let's say we're trying to get to A. The traditional way to do this would be to use the 5 chord, in this case E7. This is as vanilla as resolutions get, but it does the job. We've got the G sharp leading tone resolving up to A, and the D falling down to C sharp. These 2 notes are a tritone apart, and they combine to create the 5 chords directionality, but there's actually another chord that has both of them, B flat 7. Swapping this in for the E7 is called a tritone substitution, and again, it works perfectly. But axis theory gives us two more chords that should also resolve to A, so let's try them out. If we take G7, we get what jazz theorists call a backdoor resolution. Here, the target chord is usually minor, and the resolution works by moving the tritone, in this case B and F, to the third and fifth of the target chord, in this case C and E. It's a fairly common device and certainly works as a dominant function chord. And again, we can replace our G7 with its tritone substitution D flat 7. This is a little out there, and I don't think it feels quite as strong, but it's still a pretty solid resolution. One thing we see from this example is that the dominant axis breaks up into two pairs. You have E and B flat behaving one way, while G and D flat do a slightly different thing. In fact, Lendvai breaks all the axes up into these pairs, which he calls branches, and argues for a special relationship between chords directly across from each other on the circle, whose roots are a tritone apart. If I can do some theorizing of my own, and I can, it's my channel, who's gonna stop me, I'd say this has to do with power chords. Okay, Lendvai probably wouldn't have called them that, but power chords are chords with just a root and a fifth. They're like the scaffolding on top of which full chords are built, and if we look at the power chords on one of our axes, there's a curious relationship that pops up. Like, take A5 on our primary tonic branch. Here the notes are A and E. If we try to move to a chord on the secondary tonic branch, like say F sharp 5, our notes have to jump. There's no way to get there that's more efficient than just moving everything down a minor third. If we try to move from A5 directly across the circle to E flat 5, though, something cool happens. The notes just sort of collapse inward. Both the notes in E flat 5 are a half step away from notes in A5, so their underlying architecture is very similar, creating a sort of bond between the two. That's my theory anyway. Lendvai has his own explanation, but it's more complicated and involves metaphorical pendulums and whatnot, so I prefer mine. Anyway, back to that progression from the beginning. We see that we've got our one chord, followed by a chord on the subdominant axis, then a chord from the dominant axis, and finally resolution. It's just our 1-4-5-1 progression dressed up all fancy. This is a bit of a simplification though. Bartok was a huge fan of what's called a split chord, where you play both the major and minor thirds at the same time, so the progression would probably sound more like this. This is why we haven't really talked much about chord qualities. It doesn't matter if the chord's major or minor, because in Bartok's world, it's probably both. And there you have it, a means of asserting tonality within the traditionally atonal space of chromatic composition. It opens up all sorts of interesting possibilities, giving us lots of new tools to play with while staying true to hundreds of years of Western musical traditions. That may seem like a pretty strange thing to get excited about, but again, I'm a music theorist, and we are very fun at parties. If you also get excited about strange things, you'll probably love this video's sponsor, CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a streaming service with thousands of documentaries on all sorts of subjects, all available on whatever device you watch stuff on. One that I'd recommend is called Frank Sinatra, or America's Golden Age. Here, let me show you.
You'll never know just how much I miss you.
This is the story of a boy from New Jersey who became one of the 20th century's most influential voices. In fact, his rise to fame was only a couple decades after Bartok's, although admittedly his music was slightly different. The documentary is beautifully produced with archival footage of Sinatra's own performances and an in-depth exploration of the man known as The Voice. And once you're done with that, you can check out the rest of CuriosityStream's collection, including lots of full-length features about science, nature, and technology, among other things. Okay, enough Sinatra footage. It's a really great library, and they're even offering 12-Tone viewers a free 30-day membership. Just click the link in the description, then use the promo code 12-Tone when signing up. It's that easy. And hey, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.